he have enough? Is it long enough? He got it!
Welcome, Husker Nation, to Post Game Spread, presented by Hurrdat Sports.
His second interception on the season. Multiple flags come down on the return.
Breaking down the highs and lows of what we just witnessed from our beloved Cornhuskers.
Touchdown, Nebraska!
It's time to let it all out. Join the conversation on YouTube or Twitter at Hurrdat Sports, or live in person at the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill.
I'm done. Let's go.
It's time for Post Game Spread.
Spread it on.
Welcome into the Hurrdat Sports post-game spread, live from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. I'm Ravi, Lulla. Drake Keeler joining me today. Drake, how are you?
I'm good. I just watched a football game. Definitely a football game.
It was, in the most technical sense, a football game. That is true. Not the prettiest game we're ever going to see in our lives, but it was a win.
Yeah, Nebraska won by 2 scores.
Double-digit victory, which, listen, this morning on the show, I predicted 23-13, 20-7's in the neighborhood. I will take that. Listen, conference wins, especially road conference wins, are not easy to come by. They certainly haven't been easy to come by for Nebraska over the past several years. I don't care how ugly it is, it's a win.
Yes. I mean, it was obviously ugly. Got a few breaks to go their way in the first half. That kickoff that they recovered was odd, but they took advantage of it. And that's something we haven't always seen when the other team makes mistakes. Nebraska hasn't always taken advantage of those. I mean, well, they still didn't do that in the second half, but they did that early and they got in front, and that was what propelled them to the win.
Well, and the other thing that we haven't seen Nebraska do a ton of in recent years is overcome their mistakes, right? And there were a bunch of them, especially in the second half. Red zone turnovers. You know, the interception by Harburg was kind of an arm punt, if you will.
Yeah,
like it wasn't that big of a deal in terms of the actual giving up of the ball. They were going to punt the next down anyway. Yardage probably ends up in the neighborhood. So that's not that big of a deal, but the fumbles were a huge problem. Obviously, the red zone turnovers are a huge problem, but the defense did a great job of bowing up when they had to, gave up almost nothing in the second half. Really outside of the first drive of the game for Illinois, in which they scored 0 points.
Yeah.
And the last drive of the game for Illinois, in which they scored 0 points. Nebraska didn't give up a whole lot defensively.
No. And, I think with all those turnovers, that's a game we would have expected Nebraska to end up blowing that lead for the past few years. And they didn't do that. Part of that was probably Illinois just being really bad, but the defense also made the plays they needed to. We've known they're good. They've still given up some late plays in a few other games, and today they didn't. That's, what you want to see from a defense of that we believe is this caliber.
Well, and let's be honest here. Let's not pretend like this team hasn't blown leads to really bad teams before.
Absolutely.
Like literally Northwestern's only win last year was against this Nebraska team.
Minnesota does not look good.
In which they blew a lead, right? So the quality of the team really has not mattered when Nebraska has been throwing away games. So to get this one, and I've said this before this year, right? And I think it's true. Nebraska hasn't earned the right to win pretty yet. They haven't. Sure. They're in the part of the process where I think a lot of the wins are going to be ugly. I think whatever wins they get, they're going to have to claw and scratch and overcome mistakes to get, because this is a flawed football team, right?
Absolutely.
Are they too flawed to make it to 6-6? I don't think so. I think they can get there, especially if the defense plays like it did tonight. It'll help a lot if they can clean things up a little, but I'll take 6 ugly wins.
Yeah.
Like, I will absolutely take 6 ugly wins.
Yeah, I think 6 wins right now. I mean, I feel like that might be the ceiling, but I think they can get there. There are, 3 more winnable games on the schedule, and they did what they needed to tonight. It wasn't close at the end, as in it was a 2-score game. And that's something positive. You think they can do that against a few other teams remaining on the schedule.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think there's 5 more winnable games on the schedule. I don't think they're going to win all 5, right?
Yeah.
But outside of Maryland, and the one I'm not including is Maryland. It's not like Maryland's world beaters, right?
Yeah.
Like, they've played well so far. They're probably the best team left on the schedule, but nobody in the Big Ten West is not beatable at this point, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's I will say, I mean, I said, like, I don't think more than 6 wins is really a possibility, but also, like, there's no individual game where I'm like, I would be shocked if they win this game.
Yeah, there's no Michigans left on the schedule. There's no Ohio States, there's no Penn States, and the rest of the schedule is pretty manageable. And so if they can learn how to win ugly, and that's, Coach Rhule's talked about this a lot, about having to learn how to win. These are the games where you learn how to win. When you blow somebody out and you put up a ton of points and it goes your way the whole time, you don't really learn how to win in those games, right? You learn how to win through adversity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this was a step in that direction tonight, because they certainly were seemed like trying to give the game away at certain points. A lot of things had happened that we have seen in past games that they've lost leads in, but they were still able to come out with a victory. I think there's value in that, even if it's not the most fun to watch.
Absolutely. And I think you hear what Matt Rhule had been saying. He wants this defense to embrace that's a defensive team. And I feel like they absolutely did that tonight, maybe more than past weeks, where, they've given up a big play at the end. We've seen that in those fourth quarters. We've seen them, fall apart at Colorado, give up the late touchdown to Minnesota. I mean, Tonight they played start to finish. They gave up a few big plays, but they came through when it counted.
Yeah, they did come through when it counted. Just a reminder, you can join us on YouTube, on Twitter. Jose in the comments on YouTube says that win was fugly, but yes, but take the dub and move on. Absolutely, Jose. We're taking all dubs no matter how they look at this point in the process. We are not at a place where we are complaining about dubs. But you mentioned some of the key points in this game. Really, one of them happened right off the bat, where Illinois drives down the field. They've got 3rd and 4th and goal from basically the inch line.
Yeah.
And Nebraska keeps them from scoring. Then they go down. Would have loved to gotten a touchdown on that drive, but they end up with a field goal. That's a 10-point swing in a game that ends up 20-7. And if you're looking at that point a 17-14 game at the end of the game rather than a 20-7 game, things would have gotten a lot tighter at that point. It's rare that you can kind of point to something that early and say, man, that really might have been where the game was won and lost during that sequence, but it's entirely possible you can make that case here.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Illinois was going to score there at least. I mean, I thought they were going to get in the end zone.
I think Illinois did too.
Yeah, and then they didn't. And then I was really concerned about Nebraska being backed up to its own one. Henrik Harburg makes one of the better throws we've seen from a Nebraska quarterback this year.
Absolutely.
The play to Marcus Washington, obviously he's injured now. That's going to hurt moving forward. But yeah, that was a massive first drive, way to get on the board first, even if that first drive ended with a field goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the stats for the game, they don't look pretty. It felt like Nebraska was in control for most of this game and couldn't really pull away, which is a little odd to say in a 13-point game, but it just felt like there were a lot of opportunities that weren't taken advantage of. And frankly, the stats end up pretty close. Nebraska, 18 first downs. Illinois had 16. Third down efficiency was pretty close, 5 of 15 for Nebraska, 4 of 15 for Illinois. Total yardage, very close, 312 for Nebraska, 310 for Illinois. Penalty yards was way in Illinois' favor. They only gave up 30 yards in penalties. Nebraska gave up 70. And then Nebraska was -1 in turnovers as well. So there were a lot of things that didn't go Nebraska's way. One thing that really did, though, that time of possession, almost completely flip-flopped from last year's game where Illinois really dominated the game in that way. Nebraska held the ball for over 37 minutes tonight, and that was, to me, a huge factor in their ability to keep Illinois at a little more than arm's reach for the entire night.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they built up the lead early, and even in those possessions that had the turnovers, the possessions that they couldn't finish in the end zone, they were able to keep the ball, run the clock out, and that helped down the stretch for sure.
Yeah, that was a real big key for Nebraska here. And honestly, again, going back to that ugly win, going back to that learning how to win, I like that this game was as tight as it was. I like that this is a weird thing to say. I like that Nebraska screwed up a little bit because you can't learn to overcome those things until you make the mistake, right? Now, ideally, along that process, you learn to clean up the mistakes too, but mistakes will never be gone entirely, right? That's always going to be a part of a football game. So learning to overcome them. And listen, Nebraska had plenty of opportunities to learn to overcome mistakes tonight. That's a big deal for them moving forward, especially in this next 3-game stretch where of a very winnable schedule the rest of the way out, these next 3 games are even more so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the last time I saw Nebraska do what it did tonight, where it looks like they are in control late and then they just offensively completely fall apart with the fumbles, the turnovers, the mistakes, things like that. We've seen that a lot of times, and pretty much every time it's ended with the other team coming back and winning. Tonight they didn't even get close, really.
Yeah.
And that's a big step. That's something you really like to see. Obviously, there's a lot to improve on, like we've talked about, but yeah.
One of the things that I really I liked the way they responded to Coach Rhule's challenge of them this week. He said as soon as the Michigan game was over, hey, you're going to find out who Nebraska is on Friday. You're going to find out who we are as coaches on Friday. And I feel like we did. I was really impressed with the defense. Again, they looked way more like the team we saw against Minnesota than the team we saw against really even Louisiana Tech or Michigan. I thought they played much more loose and free and did a really good job. Man, they rallied to the ball really well. It looked like they were on their assignments and playing fast, which, usually that's the thing you worry about, right? Is if a team's playing super fast and loose, that maybe it gets a little out of sync in terms of their discipline and their assignments. But it almost seems like the faster Nebraska plays, the more on point they are.
Yeah, and I think I lost what I was going to say. The turnovers. This was the first week, I think, since week 1 where Nebraska forced a turnover that wasn't in garbage time, essentially.
Yeah, and it's the first multiple turnover game, I think, of the season
you're
as
probably
well.
right there. Yeah. So I think that was big. They had the turnover forced in the third quarter, the fumble. The hit by Phelan Sanford was great. Tommy Hill gets about 10 yards on that.
Yeah, that was a very odd return by Tommy Hill.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what he was doing
trying
there. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and then, of course, Quinton Newsome, I mean, he's right there. It was an easy play, but, he made it, and he had a big return. That helped a lot. It's what you want to see from this defense. It was kind of, you feel like the next step for this defense to finish games number 1 and to force turnovers.
Yeah, that's a thing that I've been talking about really since the first couple weeks of the season. I thought the way this team was rallying to the football, the way they were hitting, the way they were moving around, and the way they were pressuring the quarterback, which they got back to tonight, I thought it was inevitable that they would cause turnovers because you can't be around the ball that much and not eventually have good things happen for you. And so I thought this was, just like you said, kind of the next step in the evolution of this defense for Tony White to not only be there all the time, to play fast, to play free, but also to start creating some of those splash plays that can make a difference in a game. And honestly, they really did for Nebraska here. That fumble that was caused led immediately to a touchdown that was the fumble on the kickoff. Led immediately to the touchdown by Heinrich Harburg. The Phelan Sanford forced fumble. I think it technically ends up being an interception because it's
no, it was a fumble.
Oh, it was a fumble. Okay,
he made a football.
Okay, he made the football move.
Yeah,
it's hard when it never hits the ground. I'm like, I don't really know what to call that. That forced fumble and then recovery by Tommy Hill obviously was a great play for the defense as well. It's really encouraging to see progress made in those areas. Now, progress on the offense is still a work in progress. What are some of the things that you saw that let's start with the positive that you thought maybe they did improve on a little bit this week?
Yeah. one more thing on the defense.
Oh,
I
yeah,
think,
go ahead.
that's definitely something I feel like, you'd like to see them carry throughout Big Ten play. I mean, the rest of the quarterbacks on the schedule, well, there's a few at Maryland, they've got a pretty good quarterback.
Yeah, that's about
But
the only one, though.
you feel like you can force turnovers off these
Yeah.
quarterbacks, and that's something you want to see moving forward.
And
Back to the offense.
Even Tagovailoa,
go
honestly, he's been good this year, but he's had interception and turnover issues in the past couple years. It's not like he's immune to them either, but he is by far the best quarterback left on the schedule.
Absolutely. So, back to the offense. We saw Henry Harden made some throws. He made some
He
throws
did.
that we didn't really see from him, in previous weeks, I don't think. Obviously, he made some bad throws. He had some bad misses. He had the interception. He throws quite a few balls that you think are going to get intercepted.
Yeah, he had the most interceptable balls tonight. I think I counted live. I think I counted 4 interceptable balls from Harburg.
That sounds about right.
Which is, I think, to me, a better indicator of how well somebody threw the football. Because you have a couple dropped, and that doesn't mean it was a better throw. It just means the defense didn't make a play, right? So that was a little concerning. One thing that I noticed, I'm curious if you thought this as well. I thought that when, especially like the end of the first half where Nebraska was maybe trying to get a score before halftime, it felt like when Illinois knew Harburg was going to throw the football, that he really, really struggled. When it was kind of a 50-50 proposition of what was going to happen, it seemed like he was way more comfortable and had way better looks at the defense.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have, he's not, consistent throw to throw. He doesn't quite feel like always have the pocket presence necessarily. And he's going to have some struggles. And I think that's based on what we've seen, something you're going to get from whoever the Nebraska quarterback is. So it's really interesting to see, how he does continuing to move forward. He pitched the ball a few times tonight. I feel like they had to meet him 5 yards in the backfield to get him to do it. But
he did. He
made the decisions.
At least it's on tape now that he will pitch the ball occasionally, so that maybe will keep defenses a little bit more honest. I will say I thought he did better tonight of kind of navigating the pocket in certain instances. Now, he still doesn't always do a great job of resetting himself for the throw, but I thought he got himself into positions a little bit better when there was some rush coming to get a throw off. I thought that was encouraging. I do think he's been progressing as a passer through each of the 4 games that he started. I'm probably more comfortable with him as a passer now than I was a couple games ago even. And so if he can continue to improve with the just with the reps, and I mean, again, this guy has not played a ton of football before this year, so it's not crazy to think he'll continue to improve.
Yeah, and I was looking at it. I mean, Illinois had 1 sack. I feel like that's credit to the O-line as well. I felt like they did pretty solid pretty often in pass protection, but it felt like Harburg navigated out of some from time to time, and that was encouraging to see. I think there's room to grow as a passer, and I think it's realistic that he could grow in that area throughout the rest of the year. Obviously depends what pass catchers are available as well, but
yeah, we saw some guys get banged up tonight. We'll see on the status of them. I'm guessing either whenever Rhule talks to, I'm not sure with the Friday game when he'll talk to the press next, outside of the post-game presser, but I'm sure we'll get some indication on what that room looks like. Hopefully it's not anything too serious and same thing with the running back room. A couple of those guys got banged up. I know Grant came back in the game, but there's just not a lot of other options in there for either of those position groups right now.
Yeah, it is tough on the offense, and it is really just it's really going to be interesting to see how this group, kind of just keeps things afloat going forward. We know that this is a defensive team, but to get to 6 games, they're going to have to, do enough like they did tonight. For the most part,
right?
But you're not going to be able to fumble it that much every game. We've seen that before.
I honestly thought if they cleaned up the turnovers, and that, I mean, I know that's a broken record, right? Every time you talk about Nebraska for the last several years, it's if they clean up the turnovers. But outside of that, despite some of the challenges on offense, I actually thought the offense looked pretty good when they were taking care of the football. I thought they seemed to have a little bit more of a cohesive plan in place between Harburg passing, Harburg running, and the more traditional run game. It seemed like they had a pretty good feel of what they could call that worked. They kind of shot themselves in the foot with not just the turnovers, but the procedure penalties, which were getting not just a little. They've gotten out of hand this year. That's something that needs to get cleaned up as well. That because of the turnovers, probably is going to get a little overlooked tonight.
Yeah, I believe Ben Scott had another unnecessary roughness penalty. It didn't end up really mattering. They got the first down back inside the 10 and then fumbled. But, that's another thing. Like, he's had 2 of those. You can't have those. You can't be pushing your offense 15 yards back once a game. That can't happen. The procedural stuff can't happen at this level. The offense, I think the big thing is they need to get out of their own way. It's probably not going to be a great offense at any point this year, but it can certainly be better.
Yeah, I don't know that it's ever going to be super dynamic, right? But if you're, if you're just looking at from a real simple standpoint of, okay, let's say they don't miss the field goal, that puts them at 23 points. And then let's say they get field goals instead of turnovers. I'm not even talking about converting touchdowns, right? But let's say they get field goals instead of turnovers. All of a sudden you're at 29 points. You'd absolutely live with 29 points a game. Like that's a number you'd be thrilled with if you were Nebraska game in, game out. Because let's be honest, against most of these opponents, 29 points is going to win you the game for most of the teams left on the schedule. Like you get 29 against Iowa, that's donezo. That's a W. You get 29 against Northwestern, probably a W. So I think the opportunities are there. They just have to take advantage of them. Josh on YouTube asked, do you think the offensive struggles are due to the play calling or the players? And Drake, I'll get your thoughts on this, but from my perspective, tonight at least, I thought it was on the players. I thought they got themselves in positions to be successful, but like holding on to the football, that's a player execution thing. Like that's not a play call thing. The procedure penalties, that's a player execution thing. That's not a play call thing. Now, if you want to make an argument that it's a coaching during the week thing, we could have that discussion. But in terms of play calling, I don't think you can put that on the play caller, Marcus Satterfield, because they're getting procedure penalties or because they're fumbling the football or because Heinrich Harburg is staring guys down a little bit at the end of a half. I actually thought the play calling was pretty good. I thought they had a pretty nice mix between run and pass. I still thought they could have leaned into QB run a little bit more, but with a lead, they're up 17-0 and then 17-7, obviously, and then 20-7, which ends up being the final. With a 2-score lead, you probably don't want to get too many hits on your quarterback, especially because he did come up a little bit hobbled on one of them, it seemed like, although it looked like he shook that off. I really didn't have a problem with much of the play calling tonight.
Yeah, I would say the same. Obviously, in a game like this, it's on the players, to not be fumbling like that. And I would say, the one thing I kind of noticed from the play calling is I think one example early on, I think it was the first drive actually. They had a first down. They run it 3 straight times. They ran it on 3rd and 8. Felt like they were just, being really conservative, just wanting points. And maybe with this offense, you're like, that's not a bad strategy, where you don't want to put them in a position to turn it over. But I feel like, that also can backfire when, you're not willing to really attack in the red zone, go for the ends. I mean, we saw them settle for 3 close field goals, and a few other possessions.
They made 2 of them,
and beyond that, the fumbles were also close in, and they probably would have had to settle for field goals had those balls not come loose.
And on the fumbles, it's tough because that is probably conservative play calling, and that is probably trying to play it safe in there and not put your offense in a position to be to make a mistake. But at some point, if they can't hold on to the football, then there's really nothing you can call that's going to make it okay, right?
Absolutely.
Like you have to be able to execute on a base level to call anything at all. It's kind of the same thing, when we saw the drop snaps at Colorado, you can't really blame that on the play caller necessarily. Like if you can't hold on to the football when it's being snapped to you, literally nothing else can work.
Yeah.
Right. So that's something that Nebraska is going to certainly have to clean up. The good news is they've got a bye week. They've got some time to work on some things. and then they kind of get to ease back into their schedule with Northwestern and then Purdue and then Michigan State. Honestly, the schedule sets up just about as well as you could ask for.
Yeah, I think you can hope that they carry this momentum, hopefully heal up for some injured players that are even just banged up a little bit. But yeah, I mean, reevaluate some things offensively, see what you can do. And that game against Northwestern will be really interesting.
Yeah, that one's back home at Memorial Stadium. That'll be on October 21st. So if you've got to go to, Val's Pumpkin Patch, you got to go out to Apple Orchard, anything like that, like next week's your weekend, it's going to be a madhouse because everybody's doing it next weekend. But if you've got things you've got to do, that's your weekend to do it. I'll be really interested to see what improvements are made during the bye week. I think you learn a lot about how good a coach is when they are coming off of bye weeks. I think there's the Andy Reid stat where he's crazy good after bye weeks. I'm interested to see what Nebraska looks like after the bye week as well. I think that's maybe an opportunity for them to shore up some of these things that, especially on a short week like they had this week, you're not really able to do.
Yeah, and I think just the focus coming out of the bye week through the rest of the season, a lot of focus is going to be on the offense, on Marcus Satterfield, because people want to see this offense, be serviceable, not make these potentially backbreaking mistakes. Obviously, some focus could shift back on the defense if they have some lapses, but provided that this still looks like a good defensive team, it is really going to be interesting to see what they can figure out on the offensive end to make this look like an offense.
Yeah, just to be functional offensively through the rest of the schedule. I think that's a key as well. I will say one thing I noticed tonight that hadn't really been true through the first 5 games of the season. Typically, Nebraska had looked better in the second halves than they had in the first half. That was kind of flip-flopped this week. After that initial drive, Nebraska looked really, really solid in the first half. Second half, especially offensively, they did really struggle. Do you make anything of that? Or are you going to wait and see to see if there's a trend there?
I guess you kind of wait and see. I thought, there were a couple points where you felt like they could really run away with it in the first half as well. And then obviously in the second half, they have 3 red zone possessions, only get a field goal out of it. So yeah, I mean, that's something to watch moving forward. You don't want that to continue to be a trend. Obviously, it hasn't really been consistent this season, and maybe that's just going to be how it is. But that's something to watch.
Well, the mantra for tonight is ugly wins are still wins. Nebraska improves to 3-3 on the season with a 20-7 win on the road. Listen, conference road win. We are not complaining about conference road wins ever. I don't care how bad it looks. And so that is where Nebraska's at tonight. Again, reminder, next week's a bye week, so you won't hear from us. But August 21st, we'll be back with more post-game spread following the Northwestern game. Really appreciate Drake Keeler joining me here today, live from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. Cam, our producer, as well, locking it down. Make sure you listen every weekday morning to Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm here from 7 to 10 a.m., and I'll be joined by a ton of our talented team members throughout the week. Make sure you check us out on Twitter, YouTube, and all of our social channels at Hurrdat Sports. We will talk to you again soon.